Hi, welcome to the presentation of Group 2, which is on self-regulation. What you will see here is our presented data and results from our analysis, as well as our thoughts on what the research showed us during this process. Enjoy. Self-regulation is the ability to monitor, manage, and adjust one's emotions, thoughts, and behaviors in order to meet situational demands or long-term goals. In the context of counselor training, it includes managing emotional responses in session, regulating internal reactions to client disclosures, and maintaining professional boundaries. It's not just about staying calm, it's about being able to stay grounded and intentional, even in emotionally charged moments. Self regulation is essential for counselors in training because the work is emotionally intense. Interns are often exposed to trauma, crisis, or clients in distress before they fully developed professional coping strategies. Without adequate self regulation, students may become overwhelmed, emotionally shut down, or react unethically. On the flip side, strong self regulation helps promote therapeutic presence, ethical decision making, and resilience. It is influenced by multiple factors: early attachment, personality traits, exposure to stress and trauma, cultural and social context. It also develops over time with intentional support, like supervision, mindfulness training, and real world practice. For counselors in training, self regulation can be nurtured during graduate school, especially through emotionally safe learning environments and reflective supervision. Studies show that self regulation is linked to lower levels of burnout, greater empathy, and stronger therapeutic alliances, as found by Lambie et al. And Mullen et al. It's also influenced by social cultural context. Research suggests there may be differences in how self regulation is expressed or developed across ethnic or cultural groups. And in our own findings, we observe significant differences by ethnicity, which we'll explore shortly.
There were 5 questions that we looked at in this study. Number one was, is there a significant difference in self-regulation scores based on gender? And for this question, we use an independent t-test. The second was, is there a significant difference in self-regulation scores based on ethnicity? And for this one, we took an ANOVA approach. The third one was, is there a significant difference in self-regulation scores based on previous counseling? This was a independent t-test for the statistical analysis. Number 4, is there a significant difference in self-regulation scores based on time in counseling? This was an ANOVA approach. And the last one, number 5, is there a significant relationship between self-regulation scores and PCL scores, ACEs, and resilience scores? And for this one, we used a correlation. The study involved 238 first-year counseling students enrolled in Residency 1 at the Lakewood campus and online CCU. All Residency 1 students were invited to participate in the study, and before completing the survey, all participants were required to sign a research consent form. Now, upon completing the consent form, the participants were asked to complete the ACEs questionnaire, the ACE resilience questionnaire, the PTSD checklist for the DSM 5, the self regulation questionnaire, and the PTGIX in their Brightspace course. The data was analyzed using SPSS, descriptive and inferential statistics, including measures of central tendency, correlations, independent sample t-tests, ANOVAs, and multiple regression was employed to analyze the data.
Hello, I'm going to walk you through the results section. We have 5 research questions, and we'll be going through each of these research questions one by one to identify if the significance was found. So in our first research question, we were looking at identifying if there was a statistically significant difference in self-regulation scores based on gender. And those genders we were looking at are male and female. To do so, we ran the independent samples t-test and found that for males, there were 49 participants, and for females, there was 189 participants. Males had a mean self-regulation score of 231.67 with a standard deviation of 21.30. And females had a very close self-regulation score with the mean of 234.35, and the standard deviation for them was 22.15. There was no statistically significant difference between the scores, with a T of negative 0.67, and the significance was 0.448. The effect size we measured using the Cohen's d and found a small effect size as the Cohen's d was negative 0.12. Additionally, we used the Shapiro-Wilks test to test for normativity and found that the p-value was 0.33 using this measure. Our next research question looked at identifying if there was significance in the differing ethnic backgrounds. Therefore, we used an ANOVA. First, we wanted to examine if there was difference in the self-regulation scores based on the different ethnic groups. To do so, we had to identify the different ethnic groups. For white, we had 170 participants. For Black or African American, we had 23 participants. For Hispanic, we had 26 participants. And for multiracial, we had 11 participants. Because there was a few groups that had ethnic participants with 8 or fewer participants, we had to exclude them from this analysis because they did not meet a sufficient group size. However, with the 4 groups we ran, we found a significant difference with a p-value of less than 0.05 in self-regulation scores across different ethnic groups. Specifically, we found it related to Black or African American participants. They had the highest self-regulation with a score of 246.17. And the next group, the Hispanic group, had the next highest self-regulation score of 237.31, followed by white, had a self-regulation score of 231.74. And lastly, the multiracial group had a self-regulation score of 225.09. Using the post hoc Tukey comparison, we found that the mean self-regulation scores were significantly higher for Black participants compared to white participants, with a significance of 0.014, and also for Black participants compared to Hispanic participants, as the significance there was 0.467. If you look at the charts in front of me, you'll be able to identify more of the information that was ran through the statistical ANOVA analysis. Okay, moving on to our third research question. Here, we wanted to identify if there is a significant difference in self-regulation scores based on previous counseling. In previous counseling for this specific analysis, was a yes or a no answer. Because of this, we used an independent samples t-test. In the independent samples t-test, we found that there was many participants that had previously participated in therapy, with a number of 210 of those individuals, whereas only 28 individuals had no previous counseling experience. Participants who reported no previous counseling did, in fact, have a higher mean score for self-regulation with a score of 241.24 compared to those who had, in fact, received counseling in the past, whose mean score was 232.81. The difference, however, was not statistically significant, as the p-score was 0.057. And when equal variances were assumed at the confidence interval of 95%, we found that the lower and upper confidence intervals were negative 0.25 and 17.05. The effect size using the Cohen's d was considered to be small to moderate, and the Cohen's d was 0.38. This suggests that there's a possible meaningful difference, although the findings did not reach statistically significance using the independent samples t. Our fourth research question wanted to identify if self-regulation scores would have a significant difference based on the time a person spent in counseling. First, we wanted to identify the groups of time spent in counseling. The first group, considered as no time spent in counseling or none, involved 27 participants. The second group spent 6 months or less in counseling and involved 39 participants. The third group spent between 6 months to 1 year in counseling and involved 36 participants. The fourth group spent 1 year in counseling and involved 21 participants. Next, 2 years would be spent in counseling and involved 35 participants, followed by 3 to 5 years spent in counseling involving 35 participants as well. And lastly, 5 or more years spent in counseling involving 44 participants. Using an analysis of variance, we found that there was no statistically significant difference in time spent in counseling and self-regulation scores, with the significance being 0.53. The effect size was small, with the n squared value of 0.022, indicating that only 2.2% of variance in self-regulation scores can be attributed to time spent in counseling. Using the Levine's test of homogeneity of variances, we found that there was not a statistically significant difference, with the significance score of being 0.353, suggesting the assumption of equal variances was met. Finally, our last research question looked at identifying if there was a significant relationship between self-regulation scores and PCL scores, ACEs scores, and resiliency scores. To do this, we used a correlational design. We used the parametric test of the Pearson's correlation and identified that there was a significant negative relationship between self-regulation and PTSD symptoms, also considered PCL scores. This relationship accounted for 7.6% of variation, and we found that the p-value was negative 0.276. Additionally, when looking at the relationships between self regulation and adverse childhood experiences in self regulation and resiliency scores, we did not find a significant difference in those two factors. However, we did use a non-parametric test to look again at the relationship between resilience and self-regulation, as that data was non-normative. And using the Spearman's row, we did identify significance. Specifically, we identified that there was a significance of 0.43 using that analysis, and found that resilience explained for 2% of variation in higher self-regulation scores.
Our data revealed significant differences in self regulation scores based on ethnicity. Specifically, Black and African American counselors in training scored higher than white and multiracial peers. On the surface, that might be interpreted as emotional maturity, but counselor educators must approach these findings through a cultural lens. High self regulation in students of color may reflect internalized social messaging to stay calm, composed, and emotionally guarded in predominantly white or hierarchical spaces. It's not always an indicator of wellness, it can also be a trauma informed survival response. That's why we urge counselor educators to avoid deficit based assumptions. If a student of color seems emotionally shut down or highly self contained, it's not necessarily a lack of engagement. It may reflect a cultural or protective adaptation. Instead, we can promote self regulation development in culturally responsive ways. That includes embedding reflective practices and emotion focused activities in master's level residency and practicum and internship, encouraging faculty to create emotionally safe spaces for students to practice vulnerability, and providing supervision that honors both cultural expression and emotional processing. These approaches support all students while recognizing that self regulation doesn't look the same for everyone, nor should it.
We have a few limitations to our data collection and analysis. First, the data we used was collected in 2024, which indicates that this is archival data. Additionally, because of a low number of participants, we had to exclude the following ethnic identities, including people who indicated identifying as what we called some races, Asian alone, non Hispanic, American Indian / Native Alaskan alone, resulting in the exclusion of the data from 5 participants. And again, this is because those groups had less than 8 members of each of those groups. Additionally, this limits the generalizability of our data analysis, as it is not broad enough to encompass several ethnic groups, which additionally brings to light concern that there is a lack of diversity in counselors from minority groups, such as American Indians / Native Alaskans, Asians, and people who identify as some races. Additionally, this analysis was a quantitative analysis, and as such, there was no qualitative data. Further analyses related to self regulation and counselor education should consider utilizing a qualitative approach as well.
So, as far as future research recommendations and an exploration of self regulation and ethnic differences, the, considering the results of that, while we are aware that the numbers show a difference in self regulation for those who identify as Black or African American, we don't know why. We don't know why that exists. And so, exploring why African Americans reportedly self regulate better than those who identify as white and multiracial would be helpful. And Christie um, explored some of the cultural implications of that. Uh, explores self regulation in counseling. So there wasn't a statistically significant difference in self-regulation for those who attended counseling and those who didn't, but the effect size was small and moderate, which suggests a possible meaningful difference. And so a deeper exploration may help clarify um, not only those differences, but also whether that meaningful difference exists based on the modality or difference of approach, or um, why does it exist? And then finally, explore self-regulation as a longitudinal study. And so having the ability to explore MAC program students over time clarifies things, but it also allows um, CCU to fill a gap by establishing measures to improve its students' self-regulation over time. And so those are the potential future research uh, recommended or future research possibilities.